Hello. Hello. Welcome back to the boat. Are you enjoying the festival so far? Good. Is this the first show for anybody? Okay. You've been to plenty. Have you? Is this your first one? Very good. And you're looking forward to finding out about bullshit jobs? It's just to check. Who here? Is anyone? Does everybody have a job here? Yeah. Okay. It's Norway. Of course you have jobs. And if you didn't, you couldn't say. So everybody has a job. Who here? Are you all? Who here is happy in their job? Does anybody have a suspicion that they might be happy but also doing a bullshit job? Right, man. Yeah, good. We've got one brave man there. What's your job title? Senior engineer. That's not that bullshit, surely. What do you engineer? What area? Petroleum. I'd say. You know what bullshit means, though? No, it's. That sounds like an okay. Why do you think it's bullshit? Okay, but yeah, I don't think that's. I think that's just the problem with computers. You need to break the computer. That's what you need to do. Anybody else have a bullshit job? Yourself? Very good. What do you do?
I'm a potato. It's a Norwegian term, so I do a bit of everything.
A potato is a Norwegian term for doing a bit of everything, right? It means something completely different in Ireland. It's just like the only thing we eat.
Like a potato works with every dish.
Oh, okay, right.
With everything.
So, do you operate at your best when you're mashed or when you're chipped? You prefer to work as a chip. Okay, very good. And what kind of different jobs do you do?
Accounting, IT, basically something. If everyone else did their job properly, I wouldn't have a job either.
Okay, right. So you rely on other people's bullshit. Very good. That's okay too. That's an economy in itself. I'm self-employed, so for me the hours are brilliant, but the boss is an asshole. That's how I run it. So we got lots of in order to keep the spirit of the meaning of work going, we have jobs for nearly everybody in the room on stage tonight because we have 6 on stage in total, including myself. This was sparked by the title. It's called Bullshit Jobs. It's originally an article by this guy David Graeber, and then he made a book out of it. This is our jumping off point for a discussion on the meaning of work. But it's quite an entertaining book. I've read most of it. And first of all, we'll ask up. So I'll just tell you who we have in total, and then we'll ask our first speaker up. So we have Robert Dur, who's a professor of economics at the University of Rotterdam. Very good. And like most Dutch people, very tall as well too, isn't that right? That's compulsory. Christian Liesvog, did I pronounce that correctly? I am navigating Scandinavian vowels. There's one coming up here that I've practiced all day. But Christian Liesvog, philosopher and author. Will we talk about the meaning of working? Or is that the name of your book? You've written about it anyway, is that right? Okay, all right. Well, you'll get to it anyway. Okay. Helle Stensbach, that's Helle there, an economist, but also an author. And is it your first novel is out? It's a crime novel. And it's published? Very good. How long has it been published? Okay, right. So, but it's about a murder in the music industry, isn't that right? And the next, you're going to continue on writing books about murders in the fisheries. So basically, you're going through everybody's job looking for murders. That's excellent. You get to economists soon. Do get to a murdered economist. And you're also a musician, so you've lots of options for jobs. Knut, and it's Röde. Is that right? Not bad. How should I pronounce it? Röd. Knut Röd. Okay, all right. You are a labour economist and a public economist and a researcher. Lene Rakel Andersen, economist, philosopher, and author, and also, according to this, a nearly theologian. So this is because you studied theology and then you found out all there was to know and left before the exams. Good. And you also have a book. Oh, do you want to hold up your book to the audience there? It's called, what's it called? The Nordic Secret. Which is not the Danish version of the book The Secret, in case you're wondering. It's a book about why Scandinavia is amazing. And I know it because in Ireland, whenever anything goes wrong, we are told what they are doing in Scandinavia. Every single time there will be an article about, or a news story about teenage pregnancies in Ireland, and then they will say, in Scandinavia there are only 4 teenage pregnancies, and every one of those children goes on to win the Nobel Prize. And, you know, if there's something to do with maternity leave, in Scandinavia you get 4 years maternity leave, and you don't even have to have had a child. And this is true. This is true. I already have earned paternity leave just since arriving. I'm entitled to 3 weeks off next year just for being here. It's an amazing place. I just think about Scandinavia, though, and even walking around this Stavanger, that everything is so perfect and clean and seems to function so well. I feel like it's one of those horror movies where everything looks amazing, but I'm waiting for somebody to tell me that something is wrong. So I'm waiting for somebody to tap me on the shoulder and say, have you noticed nobody here has a small finger on their right hand? And I'm like, oh my God, you're right. And then that's when the horror movie starts. I'm waiting for that moment every time I walk around, because it's so perfect here. Anyway, enough from me. Let us talk about bullshit jobs and the meaning of work. And I'd like to start by welcoming, we've got everybody here. We've got Robert, Christian, Helle, Knut, Lena. But first of all, Robert Dur, can you talk to us about bullshit jobs and the meaning of work for a few minutes? Round of applause for Robert, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you. Yeah, let me start by saying that I'm super excited to be here. I heard about economics festivals. There's one in the south of Europe and maybe also one in UK. I'm not completely sure. But this whole idea of doing a festival in the city, have lots of events, also music and other stuff is just a great idea, and I'm looking forward to the moment that it's also happening in my city, Rotterdam, in the Netherlands, which, by the way, has a lot to offer also in many, many ways. But tonight we talk about bullshit jobs, or useless jobs, as I like to call them. Because indeed the essay in 2013, and then later on also the book in spring this year by David Graeber, have received a lot of attention in the press. So many people have heard about, big statements that many people in the modern economies have jobs that they find actually not useful. So I looked up what I found the most funny sort of headlines. So, for instance, the Wall Street Journal says a few years ago, bankers are not alone in doing useless jobs. I thought it was quite nice. And then also typically in these newspaper articles, claims are made that this is a growing problem, that more and more you see people feeling that their jobs are useless. And to quote David Graeber, so in his essay in 2013, he says that large numbers of people in Europe and America in particular, they spend their entire working lives performing tasks that they secretly believe do not really need to be performed. Now, that's a statement, no? And then he says, the moral and spiritual damage that comes from this situation is profound. It is a scar across our collective soul. Now, when I was reading this essay and these newspaper articles, this really triggered me as an economist, because typically, we tend to think that, things out there in the economy are not that bad. I mean, of course, we all know that there are lots of imperfections. There's, in many countries, unemployment, for instance. In the public sector, people tend to believe that there's a lot of slack. But as bad as is described by David Graeber, I could hardly believe that that is the case. But I must say this really, triggered my curiosity in this topic. Before I was mainly interested in, people searching for jobs with a lot of meaning, where they can make a big difference to society. And now this was sort of the other side of the coin. So people ending up in jobs where they feel like useless, or even worse than useless, where they feel that they actually create damage to society. So that spurred my interest in this. And so together with my co-author, Max van Lent, who is now in Leiden University, we did a search for data. Because the book and also the essay by David Graeber, it's all really nice. And to us, this was really like sort of agenda setting and curiosity creating. But it is anecdotal. So it's a collection of stories, of experiences of people. And we should wonder, what does this say about the economy at large? Are these the exceptions? Or is this much more common than perhaps we tend to believe? And so we looked for data sets that are representative, and ideally for data sets that have also been repeated over time, so that we can see whether indeed, claims like this is a growing problem are true. Now, in the end, we found one data set that sort of fulfilled our needs. And that is called the International Social Survey Program. It covers almost 50 countries and 4 points in time during the last, 30 or 40 years or something. Okay, so quite nice. And the question, so it consists of like 50 or 60 questions or so, but the question that we make use of is the following. It is, my job is useful to society. Okay, that's the question. And there are 6 ways of answering this. So you can answer, I don't know. Only 1% of the people says, I don't know. And the other 5 categories are, I strongly agree that I make a contribution to society. I agree. Neither agree nor disagree. I disagree and I strongly disagree. Okay? And in our research, we label people who say, I disagree or strongly disagree that my job is useful for society as people who have a useless job, or at least believe they have a useful job, because it need, of course, not be true. It's at least their perception, which is bad enough already, no? Okay, so then what do the numbers say? So in this whole data set, in 2015, that's the most recent wave, if you look at all countries, then 8% of the people, 8% of the workers, they say, my job is useless. Okay. Another 17% chooses the middle category. So they can't agree with the statement, I make a contribution to society, but they also don't disagree. We call them doubtful. They are doubtful about the usefulness of their job. So is this number high? Is it low? Well, it depends on your prior. David Graeber also mentions a few numbers in his book. It's more like 35%, 40%, these kind of numbers he calls. So in that perspective, these numbers are relatively low. Honestly, for me, I found them relatively high. 25% of the workforce at least is doubtful about whether he or she is making a contribution to society. So we had the feeling this is definitely worth a more serious look. And so that's what we did. So, by the way, I also collected now some Norwegian data, or collected. I zoomed into the Norwegian data as well. So in Norway, the numbers are more or less the same, slightly lower. So rather than 8%, it's 6%, and rather than 17%, it's 15%. Okay, so all in all, 21% or so is at least doubtful. Is this growing over time, this percentage of workers who believe their job is not useful? The answer is no. So we have 4 points in time. It starts in 1989. Then we have 1997, 2005, 2015. Okay? And what we see is it starts low, then moves up, it moves down, it moves up. And as it turns out, we later on also analyzed whether this relates to the business cycle, and the answer is yes. It does relate to the business cycle. So in times when the economy is doing badly, many more people say, my job is useless. And in booms, like in most countries today, much less people say, my job is useless, okay? Which perhaps also sort of makes sense. For Norway, similar pattern. So the growth in this over time, we do not find it in the data, but the limitation, of course, is that the first point in time that we have is 89, okay? So that it's not like 100 years ago. What sector of occupations do you see these people who doubt the usefulness of their job? Well, it's mainly in business, much less so in public sector. So all in all, for the whole data set, so it was 8% all in all. In business, it's more like 10%. In the public sector, it's more like 4%. We also made lists of jobs with the top percentages of people saying, my job is useless, and the bottom. And there you see sort of a similar pattern. So in the bottom list, where the lowest numbers are, what you see is jobs like firefighters, nurses, teachers, police people, people working in healthcare, school teachers, and so on and so forth. If you look at the top categories, the kind of people that you see are, well, at least overrepresentation you can find in jobs like sales and marketing, finance managers, plant and machine operators, and yes, economist. So Max van Lent and me, we are microeconomists. We always joke that this must be macroeconomist. But the economists are there. Now, I must say immediately that, also for these categories, which are like the top categories, the percentages are still relatively low. So the top percentage is 21%. That's in sales, marketing, and public relations. So that's still not super high. All right. So another interesting pattern that we find is when we look at age. So the older you are, the less likely you are to believe that your job has no use. Okay, so this is mainly to be found among younger workers. Right? And this pattern is quite strong. And we believe it has to do with people searching for jobs, searching for meaning in the labor market. Probably preferences on this also differ. And so initially, at the early stage of your career, maybe you're still searching. You sometimes have a job that actually you don't like so much or don't find that so useful, but you have to experience it and then search for a new job. But if you are a young worker and you feel doubtful about the usefulness of your job, I mean, there's hope, because for most older people, this sort of seems to vanish. Finally, a few words about the causes and consequences of all this, because so far I've been talking mainly about, this phenomenon and how big it is and how it differs. I could talk forever about it because it's such an interesting data set. For instance, you can also compare countries, and you can make many different comparisons. But I would like to end by talking a little bit about the causes and consequences. Let me first talk about the consequences. So, of course, if it is true that many people have a useless job, then first of all, this is a waste of resources, right? It would be better if people do useful stuff rather than useless stuff, right? Secondly, there are consequences for job satisfaction. Many people, a big majority of people, they find it very important to do something useful on the job. So you seem to be the exception, no? You claim to be happy and useless at the same time. But, I mean, they exist also in our data set, by the way, but there are few of them. Most people would like to do a useful job. So in the whole data set, what you see is that this 8% of people who says, I feel that I'm not useful to society, half of them considers this to be a problem. Okay? And the other half says, and this is not an important thing for me. By the way, in Norway, this is slightly different. So in Norway, 6% of the people feel their job is useless. And of these 6%, 5% says, and that's okay for me because I don't care so much about being useful. So this says to me that this labor market is actually functioning quite well, People get the job with the aspects that they find important, apparently. But this is not the case in all countries. Now, so what we see in the data, because we also have job satisfaction, is that if people find it important to be useful, but perceive the job as useless, that job satisfaction is much lower. And this is of this relationship is the magnitude in the order of, whether you have a permanent contract or a flex job, whether you have autonomy on the job or not. So it's like an important factor, so it seems. Now, and finally, it's also important for productivity, because by now there have been a series of experiments, well-done experiments, I believe, where they have manipulated the meaning of work. And every time what these studies find is that the less meaningful the job is, the less productive people are. Okay? And so if people believe the job is useless, then even if it is useful, there are consequences for productivity, because it's going to slow them down, because it's not valuable to work on this. So how much time do I have left?
You probably have about a minute.
1 minute to talk about causes.
I'll give you two. I'll give you two.
Oh, two.
Okay.
Cool. Then I talk about what can be done as well. Okay, so about the causes. So we thought about five different possible causes and find a bit of evidence for most of these. So first of all, in economies, there are many useful activities being done. There are goods produced that people enjoy and find important, and services provided and so on. But we all know, and as customers have experienced, that there are also economic activities that are actually either useless or actually damaging. Think of salespeople who try and sell you something that you don't need. Okay, so it happens, no? So And typically these salespeople also know that somewhere in their mind, you know. So these kind of activities exist, and these may explain why we get this overrepresentation of useless jobs in sales and marketing, and perhaps also in finance. And it's the workers themselves who feel that way. It's not that I'm making this up or something, it's themselves. Now, secondly, there is a theory of alienation by Karl Marx, who says, you know, division of labor into small pieces may also give people the feeling that what they do, this little piece, has not really a meaning, because you lose out of sight what the end product is. We get also a bit of evidence for that, because these plant and manufacturing workers, and we also have a category of people doing routine kind of jobs, that theory may apply for those workers. We also find some evidence for what we economists call labor hoarding. Labor hoarding is a strategy of organizations to keep in workers even if there's no work to be done. Why? Well, the hope is that soon things will get better, and then you want to have the workforce intact. And so for a period of time, people have little to do, and we see clearly this pattern in the data if we look at the business cycle. Two causes that we thought were important, but we don't find evidence for, are first of all, bad managers. We thought that in countries or sectors where managers do a bad job, that there would be a lot of useless jobs, or workers would have the feeling, many workers would have the feeling to do a useless job. But we don't see a pattern between these two things. And also we thought that perhaps very strong job protection legislation may result in many people having a useless job. So the idea being that because of technological progress, robots and all that, all kind of tasks at some point no longer need to be done. Now, if you are operating in an economy with a very strong job protection legislation, as a firm you may not be able to fire people, it would be too costly, and so people end up sitting idle at the desk. Okay? We don't find evidence for it in the data.
Okay. Robert,
That's it. And we talk later about what can be done. Wonderful.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Robert. So I'm going to invite all our panelists up. So if Lena, Helle, Knut, Christian up on. So I've never actually had standing. I feel like we should start singing in a cappella. Maybe I'll stand out of it just to kind of face you. That way it's not as intimidating for the audience or for you. If I could start with you, Lena, as from a philosophy point of view, has the meaning of work changed, do you think, over the last few decades?
Yes, because there are a lot of work jobs out there where people have a hard time describing what it is they're actually doing when they are at work. And I had a conversation with some people specifically on this a couple of years ago, and they realized they could not tell their children what they were doing at work. Not because it was criminal or morally wrong or anything, they simply couldn't explain it.
That's the same for me trying to explain to my parents what I was doing.
Right.
Because I was once a management consultant, and my mother, I just told her I worked in something to do with computers.
Right.
Yeah, sorry,
Right.
go ahead.
So I think as our jobs become more and more abstract and more detached from basic needs and very concrete things, there's a tendency to find them less meaningful unless you can really see that they make a difference for other people. And I suggest that you do some studies where you go into actually talking to people about what it is they are doing, and maybe whether they can describe what they do or not, and if they can, to what age groups they're capable of describing it. If you can describe it to an 8-year-old so it makes sense, it's probably a very useful job.
Do you think that in finding out about, I think we have two extremes, don't we? We have the anecdotal in the book, which is just in terms of the data in the book, it's about 350 data points, because he gets 100 how would you say, 100 unsolicited pieces of feedback from people, and then he looks for about 250 more. So it's a book full of anecdotes, but they are powerful anecdotes. It's also a self-selecting group in that if you ask people, are you unhappy with your job, then you're going to get more people saying they're unhappy. Nobody's going to send you a message saying, I'm happy actually, I have nothing further to say. But do you think that, and then you've got the data set that Robert is quoting, that there is room in the middle of that for a qualitative, large numbered investigation?
Oh, absolutely. Because, and also as technology is changing a lot of our jobs, what is there left for us to do, and who are getting the higher and higher salaries? It's not necessarily the school teachers and the nurses and the firefighters. So there is a mechanism in our economy where you get paid more and more for doing perhaps less and less useful stuff. And we can just look at the bankers right now and what's happening to draining our economies. That's definitely not useful for any of us. And they've taken out salaries in the millions of euros and dollars and so forth. So we need to look thoroughly at the structure of our economy.
Knut, as a labour economist, what do you find in your work in terms of impacts of or the changing rate of job satisfaction or job meaning?
Well, if I were a hardcore economist, I would probably say that this phenomenon of bullshit jobs doesn't exist, because people are rational and nobody would hire people to do something useless, because then they would be driven out of the market. And I think that's sort of the typical economist reply that also David Graeber has met in his discussions. Of course, we all know that there is a lot of imperfections out there. So bullshit jobs can exist. And I think as a researcher, I think I even feel that my own work is subjected to some bullshitization from time to time. And I actually think that a lot of researchers feel this, that maybe this is a good example, that within research, we spend more and more time on justifying our research, on communicating our research, on making applications, evaluating others' applications, and ticking boxes, reporting results, and less time on actually doing research. And I think that's part of what he writes about in this book. I actually read part of this. I think I read approximately the 100 first letters. Then I got a bit bored. It was kind of repetitive, I think. But of course, it's actually quite funny to read these stories. And I think it resonates with what many of us actually experience. So I guess all jobs are probably felt a bit bullshit from time to time. And a theme that is repeated in many of these letters is not necessarily that what you do is pointless, but that you simply have nothing to do. And then you have to pretend that you have a lot to do, because that's what the environment expects from you. And that's kind of stressful. And I think that, I guess we have experienced that, most of us.
One thing which you echo something that's in his book, which goes across a number of professions, is you find yourself spending more time away from the core description of researcher.
Yeah.
So presumably you have to spend more time justifying research. You probably have to spend time, you bring out a piece of research and then the media will grab the headline of the research, write 100 words about it and put exclamation marks and clickbait on it, whereas if they're not, nobody's willing to read the detail. Why do you find you have to spend more time communicating and justifying your research? Is that there's less respect for researching as a profession, or there's more stakeholders, or there's more people whose job it is to examine what you do?
I actually think it's important to communicate our research results, and it's really enjoyable when people are really interested. But I think what could be the problem is that sometimes you get the feeling that you have to write all these reports that you suspect that no one is ever going to read them or having a look at them. So that's a kind of stressful. And I think this is part of this what we call new public management idea, that we want to have sort of market-like forces into the public sector, into the way we organize also the research. And that generates a lot of things that I think we from day to day will feel as bullshit.
Is that due to mistrust of kind of a mistrust whipped up about how public money is spent?
Yeah.
So you have to spend more time explaining how it's spent.
Yeah, and maybe that mistrust could be to some extent be justified. So I mean, the whole idea behind this is, of course, that those who organize it this way hope that this will sort of raise the quality of research. That we have to really demonstrate that we're good to create this competition and raise quality. So maybe it works. maybe not. But I think bullshit jobs is, in some sense, a part of this story.
Helle, what impact do you think, you're an economist in the area of in unions, organised labour, does it make a difference people's, either the amount of bullshit jobs there are, does the presence or absence of unions impact on people's job satisfaction or sense of purpose about their jobs, do you find?
I would believe so, because we experience the unions have a strong impact on the labor market in Norway and in the Nordic countries, and especially in Norway, I've been so lucky to follow the wage settlements on the national level in Norway, which is quite special, and we do have a beautiful model for wage settlement, and that model provides that we are taking the gains from productivity growth and we distribute it over the employees. So we get a good distribution, and or fairly good, I think, better than many. It might be better in Norway as well, but we do manage the distribution job better here than many other countries. And I think that is the challenge, because I do believe that there are bullshit jobs, but the magnitude of it, I don't know, but I believe in our friend here. He has
Robert, yeah.
he has some qualified guesses on the magnitude, but I still think that 8% is much. It's very much.
Do you think that if people feel that their effort, so their increased productivity benefits other people, do you think that improves their own sense of
if it does,
utility?
Well, if it does, if the gains from increased productivity makes money that some people can play around with and do bad management with, and maybe owners are too lazy, that's not good. So we have to find, and I think also in the technological change and the robotization, what comes now, it may make some jobs, it might automatize a lot of things, production, and that is a really challenge. We have to find out how to distribute the gains from the capital production, and that is we might do that in the best channel for distribution is the wages. Yeah. In the labor market, and the second best is the taxes. Yeah. And I think we have an important job to do, and an important discussion also to make that right.
Christian, from a philosophical point of view, do you think people's sense of worth about their job, sense of its usefulness, is impacted on society's value systems, the value it places on particular jobs? So, you know, what society thinks a philosopher's job is worth compared to a oil worker or a doctor. Like, does that, you know, as a philosopher, do you feel valued by society, and would that make a difference to you, not personally, and also extrapolating out into what other people might think?
I get it, yeah. Well, I was invited here, so that gives me a certain value, I suppose. But apart from that, I feel, you know, sometimes I feel that, yes, I do have a bullshit job from the perspective that we're now talking about it. And I also feel like something like akin to a ghost from the future. Because I think that the basic problem with this, well, this whole perspective we're now discussing is that work comes first, and then meaning somehow needs to relate to work. You know, and I think that our society, people are in many ways addicted to work. It's become this addiction that you cannot really even rethink what work is. So, but you know, if you look at, for instance, becoming or going into retirement, it's very difficult for a lot of people. But if you take one step back and say, why should it be difficult to go into retirement? And I think that has a lot to do with the kind of the sequence of things, or the causality here. Because work must not come first. Meaning must come first. And I really don't think that people in their lives in general have a lot of problem finding meaning. It's just that they have this kind of well, it's an addiction. It's an addiction to work. And for me personally, and I also think that's the job of philosophy, is to do something about that perspective and say that we do not put society first. It's not society who determines my value. Sure, we need to get along. We're a big tribe here. Yes, we have to do these things, but don't be carried away by this. It really is in a way it's nonsensical. If you have a cow producing milk in a barn and you let it loose, it does not commit suicide. And in a way, we are more natural beings than cows are. We really are. And that does not mean that it's utopian or romantic or anything like that. I'm not talking about enjoying leisure and just, loitering. I'm talking about deep meaning that's there, potential. And
So maybe if I can follow up on this, because this reminds me of a discussion that is currently going on in the Netherlands about gender inequality and men and women working so different number of hours. So in the Netherlands, it's the case that women tend to work part-time, like 2 or 3 days per week, and men, they tend to work full-time. There are a few exceptions, but that's sort of the general pattern. And then there are discussions like, how can, because also if you look at hourly wages, there's big gender differences. And then typically the argument is made that women should behave more like men. So increase number of hours, put more weight on the career and so on. But the perspective that you hear very little is, that perhaps the men have something to gain by, changing the choices they make. No? And so if I look at the data, I see slowly that also the Dutch men sort of move towards 4-day work week or 4.5-day work week. It's going super slowly. And I believe that, offering these kind of perspectives, at least stressing that this is a possibility, can already make a difference. Yeah.
Just following up on that, and as a general question to the panel, one of the opening remarks, and I think it's in the original article about bullshit jobs, is that at some point 100 years ago, there was a dream that we would work the equivalent of 2 or 3 days a week because there was labor-saving devices, and somewhere along the line, we'll say the anecdotal evidence would suggest we invented something to be doing because, as you say, addicted to work, and 40 hours a week seems like a natural amount of time to be spent under somebody's thumb, be it in school or be it working for a boss. But do you have a sense, give it to any of you, that an economy which has necessary jobs, which don't have jobs of selling people things they don't want, or huge amounts of money and time spent on advertising things that are unnecessary, or making things that are unnecessary, or ticking boxes that are necessary, that we can somehow get along and function with less, working 2 days a week, having less stuff? Or is there a fundamental law that says, no, we all need to be busy all the time, otherwise we'll starve? So who wants to take that? Do you want to take that?
Well, we have the wrong dreams about society and for ourselves, and the wrong things are giving us status. I mean, long work hours and being busy, then you're a high status person. If you have short work hours and are not very busy, you don't have a lot of status. So, and we're social beings, so we want to do what the neighbor think is impressive. And if the neighbor thinks it's impressive that you work long hours, you'll be working long hours. So we need to change the narrative about what it is that we do and why we do it. And there's an old concept that I have not heard anybody talk about in a long time, and it's having a calling. And the people who are nurses and firefighters and police officers and particularly school teachers do it because they have a calling. And we've built our societies on these callings. And it's something really deep inside the human being where you feel that I must do this because I can do something that nobody else can do. And we don't talk about that anymore.
Are there enough jobs for people with callings? We need a finite number of teachers, nurses, firemen.
We have 1 teacher per 2 children. I mean, that would be great.
Yeah.
So once you have a calling, and we organize the economy around that, we could use the robots for useful stuff instead of ticking everybody off in boxes and spreadsheets. I mean, that's one of the reasons why we're stressed out all the time.
But has anybody ever crunched the numbers and said, if like that an economy, because we're so hardwired to believe that GDP has to grow by 2%, that we have to be slightly bigger this year than last year, growth, all that kind of thing. Have we ever figured out that, if we've just people doing what they want to do and working as long as they want to, that everybody will have enough to eat? I'm being facetious, but do you want to come in on that?
Well, David Graeber seems to think that one of the reasons why we have all these bullshit jobs is simply that there aren't enough jobs in total. So we have to do some bullshit. So there is some sort of some underlying idea here that this is something that is being staged by the ruling classes just to keep us busy, so that we don't make any trouble.
Do you believe that?
No, I think that's bullshit. Because there is always meaningful work to do. But I think, leisure is there is nothing wrong about leisure. So if we want to have more leisure and less flat screens or things, that would be perfect. That's an economist cannot say that flat screens are better or more valuable than leisure time. But that's the sort of choice we make.
Are you talking about moving the balance from stuff to experience? To time.
Yeah. But I think it's very fundamental for people to feel that they are useful. I think we need to feel that we make some kind of contribution, that we're useful. That reminds me of sort of the definition that you use in your survey, because your definition of a bullshit job is that you sort of, if I remember correctly, that you in some sense do something that is useful for society. But obviously, not all jobs are very useful for the society at large. At least that depends on your values. And I think this oil engineer example is very good. In Stavanger, with all this oil activity, you have a job that is extremely profitable, generates a lot of value. But if you're an environmentalist, you could feel that this is bad for society.
Yeah.
But is it a bullshit job?
No, yeah, in a sense, it is surprising that so many people feel that they make a contribution to society. Also, I mean, it's not only public sector, also in business. It's like 70 or 75% of the people feel like I make a contribution to society. And I have the same experience when I talk with friends or people that I work with that work in business, that by far most of them, they feel that they are doing something meaningful and important for society.
Christian, you wanted to come in earlier on? Or has the point moved on?
No, not really. I mean, there's one fundamental point here that I keep returning to, and it's this: it's the meaning of meaning, basically. And I think that from the perspective of society, it has to somehow be operative. This concept of meaning in society. But for a philosopher, it's a lot about finding meaning in to the individual, to yourself, but also on the very meta level. So between here is society, and I think that's where we're moving. This middle section is kind of changing so much that we need to, in a way, we need to rediscover what is essentially and fundamentally human. And I think that developments now, they kind of point towards some very interesting things. That those most valued by society today, valued by the market, they are in a way human examples, human representatives of instruments. They will be replaced. So the surgeon will be replaced, but maybe not the nurse. Because there's something fundamentally human that we need to rediscover. And I do not think that society can rediscover that. We need to do that. And for instance, care for nature, for ourselves, for close relations. But this addiction to work and the link between work and meaning is very much an addiction to society, which is, I don't want to be romantic here, but it could be that we need to think in smaller entities when we look for meaning.
Okay. Helen, just from a personal point of view, I'm just curious, as somebody who has almost 3 different careers, as a writer, musician, and economist, do you find that having different specialities, say in your own personal example, lends meaning from one to the other? So, you're an economist who writes novels, and, does one provide a break from the other? Does that provide some of the secret as to, or assuming that you enjoy all 3 of your jobs?
Yeah, I do. I enjoy all 3, and I am a workaholic, so I enjoy working very much. but I think the perception is when I make music, I'm useful to society, or if I think of society as one or two people or three, because people, they become very happy if you give them something beautiful, which is music. So people are enjoying that very much, and my novel has also made some pleasures or joy. Those who have read it and liked it, so
Has it
they
been
get
translated to English?
No, it hasn't, not yet. No,
That's a shame.
but I can feel the joy from people from those two jobs very strongly, but they don't pay very well. So, but the third job or the main job, the one with a wage settlement in the national level, is extremely important. And almost no one knows about it. And almost no one in Norway knows what is happening inside the locked rooms of the Riksmekler. Yeah, no, yeah. In the when we are deciding, when we are actually fighting very, very hard in those closed rooms, and we are not allowed to tell the outer world what is happening inside there
Until you reach a final answer.
Yeah, but we have to shut up about certain things that is said in those rooms. We must never tell. But it's very, very hard battles, and it's very important results. And almost no one understand, almost no one know, actually, when it happens. And I really want to tell all my friends, this is so important. You really must understand.
Okay.
So it's... and it pays well, but no one is showing me that they enjoy it.
Yeah.
Now you made me very curious.
Yeah. Well, exactly. I think you should put it into your next novel.
You could tell
Somebody dies during negotiations.
Yes. So, just a kind of a question about is the kind of discussion we're having, is it the sort of discussion that we have the luxury of having in countries where our basic needs are satisfied, and therefore we have time to think about how happy we are? Like, is it a universal problem? Is this a classic first world discussion, or is it just as important for people in countries where some of the more basic needs are still in doubt? Who would like to? Do you want to take that?
Well, he's done some research on this from different countries. So
That's right. We have 50 countries, but we don't really have poor countries in the data set. So in that sense, I can only speculate. I would. Sorry.
No, I was just in Uganda. I don't think they have this problem.
Yeah. And I presume, I mean, if you've been in any, if when you visit a country that has less material wealth, it's somewhere in between the romantic sense of they're poor but they're happy, and also there is a sense that you can see people doing classic office box ticking jobs. It's just that it's done more laboriously, and it doesn't seem like it has any more meaning. But is it just that there is less space to be considering one's status in life? Is that what, do you think?
I don't know, but I guess a surprising thing about your findings, I think, is how many people are really satisfied with their jobs, and even those who feel that they have a bullshit jobs appears to be satisfied. So maybe it's not that bullshit after all. So and I think if you go to poorer countries, most people will be satisfied just to have a job.
Yeah.
Okay.
And that is, I think, also more generally what you find when you go to representative data sets, that, like outrageous stories negative stories that you hear turn out to be, not that bad. So, for instance, there's also a recent, very nice study about how people think about their boss. Now, I'm sure if you do on Twitter or some other social media a call for people who don't like their boss and come up with stories, that thousands, will gather and tell you all kind of nasty stories, so you could write a book about it. But then if you look at representative data and you ask people like, does your boss treat you like a human being and with dignity? Is the person encouraging, enthusiastic, grateful, does show recognition, and so on and so forth? Like, 87% or so says, yes, that's like my boss. You know, I'm not saying that 13% people complaining about the boss is something that's negligible. It's still a sizable number, but, you know, it's much better than what we tend to believe. No? So I think there's also reason to be optimistic.
Just to pick up on something you mentioned, and then we'll go to, if there's the audience has any questions, what role do you think in terms of one's perception of usefulness or satisfaction in work, or the meaning of one's work, is dictated by social media and the extent to which before there was a sense that venting, that shouting in rage was good for you, but now more recent research suggests that letting it all out is actually creating more toxicity. Do you think social media impacts the general sense of how happy people are about their jobs? Who wants to... Do you want to take that, Dana?
They probably just have something to do when they don't have anything to do at their job. So,
It fills a gap. It's easier than playing patience.
yeah.
You can spend your time on the workplace.
It's like you can be on your
And-
computer
yeah.
and look as if you're working.
Yeah.
Okay.
But also in that way, what I would like to stress is that, and also give as an advice. So whenever you would feel like, you know, struck in a job where you feel you do bullshit, then, I mean, I think the best advice is to try and escape, rather than sit on your phone the whole day or complain and stuff. And actually, that's also what we find in the data. So they also asked all these people, it's more than 100,000, like, are you actively searching for a job? Would you take a job offer if there would be one? And then, you know, among those who find meaning important and don't have it, I mean, they are searching, you know, so... and the same with bureaucratic rules. I mean, also at my place, you know, in particular,
in the university, is it?
At the university, yes, like 10, 15 years ago. I mean, these kind of stories that were all around, you know, that you would have to register each and any publication, even being here tonight, I would have to register. It's no longer like that. You know, we have changed the system, and it's because a few individuals, they took action and said, look, you know, this is going to be destructive for what we actually should do, namely teaching, research, that should be high quality. And so get rid of most of the registrations. And so change can happen. That's... I think an important message.
Do you find... Sorry, go ahead.
So you have eliminated bullshit at your university?
Well,
Yeah.
to quite some extent, yes. Yeah.
Impressive.
Would you care to publish a book?
Yeah.
The Death of Bullshit, maybe?
Well, so one of my research areas is organizational economics. So I tend to think a lot about how to design organizations, provide incentives so that, you know, organizations function well. And so me and my colleagues, we also try to apply these kind of insights to our own workplace, you know, to try and improve things. And sometimes it helps. Yeah, that's at least, our experience.
Christian?
I think it's worth mentioning that, you know, asking people if they find their job meaningful, you know, it's a subjective answer. And maybe it's also worth thinking that there's something more than that in play here. There's some kind of truth. You could say, I would think that a lot of people that are bloggers or something like that, they would answer, yes, it's super meaningful. I get a lot of likes, I'm an influencer. But medically, psychologically, philosophically, this is not a good idea. So you can have lots of meaning, but the problem is that when I said that we need maybe to rediscover something more fundamentally human, is that these systems, they do not interact well. The internet does not interact well with the human brain. It's just true. The way that our society is structured, the world as we know it, does not necessarily interact very well with our bodies. Also true. We need to be very, very careful these days and use a lot of science. We used to know how to do this very, very well, you know. So it doesn't have to be, yes, I find it meaningful. You could say, well, apparently not. You know, you're not healthy. You're not, it doesn't really work.
Okay, all right. Thought-provoking one. Any questions from people in the audience about the meaning of work? And this man here in the front row.
Yeah, I lack the word culture, work culture here.
So you want to hear more about work culture?
Work culture, because you can have situations where you have a boss which is very strict and give his commands and expect it back, and the worker disagrees, but he cannot do anything. So he put himself in a very stressful situation.
Okay, so for anybody who didn't hear, the man is asking about the impact of work culture, the culture of the boss, whether they're autocratic or whether they're collaborative, and how does that impact on work satisfaction. Who wants to? Do you want to start, Knut?
Yeah, this is also sort of topic in this book. And many of the stories are about these kind of situations where you have this boss supervising you, asking you or forcing you to do bullshit jobs, and if you don't have anything to do, they just find up some meaningless activity. So this obviously creates a lot of tensions. But this is sort of, I mean, we all know these stories. We have heard about them, but they are anecdotal and.
You know, this is about perceptions.
Yeah.
As you talked about. And if you are in a situation where you feel you are not doing anything which sort of generates income or luck or whatever, then you are in a bad situation, and I would call that a bad situation.
I know that we're famous for a flat power structure in the Nordic countries. There's a fly here. And I know that in the rest of the world, even in the United States, there's a tendency to be more of a hierarchical perception of what leadership should be like, and there are some cultural conflicts when they have bosses from the US coming to Europe, and particularly the Nordic countries, because the employees don't just take orders. We ask questions, and we want to be creative, and we want to take responsibility at work. And then you got bosses from the Nordic countries going to the rest of the world, and there you have people who prefer that their boss makes the decisions, because then they won't be doing anything wrong. And so there's a culture conflict, and I think that if you fit into the culture, whatever that culture is, you may find your work meaningful. If you come from a culture where you have great respect for older leaders, and you're a good person if you don't question leaders and people who are older than yourself, then it may feel very meaningful to be working in such a place. It would feel horrible for somebody like me. And then if you have a workplace where there's a lot of responsibility put on your shoulders, and you're not educated for it, you're not used to it, and you're really afraid of being scolded for doing something wrong, that can create a lot of anxiety and discomfort. And whether that makes the job meaningful or not, at least your life can be a hard place to be. So yes, there is a cultural difference.
Anyone else? Yes, man there. You can talk up as well too, so that the audience can hear you.
I was just wondering if there is a kind of, if it's rational to have the perception that your work is kind of meaningless, and that perception is a price to pay for productivity growth. And what I have in mind is described slightly in Hansen in this way it works, that if you look at the transformation of the economy from being self-sufficient, I idolize the farmers who produce their own goods. There was no problem then by seeing the meaningfulness of what you do, because you chose to do that. But the transformation to the market economy, then you become much more specialized. You do a small component of a large process which you don't see the entire picture. And he was afraid that that kind of reduced the valuation of being and producing. So, well, do you see some kind of contradiction between efficiency gains and the perception of feeling yourself meaningful or not doing bullshit work?
Who wants to? Whoever's first, I don't mind.
I think there's some truth to that, because
So to repeat, can you just repeat the point, just to?
Yeah, the point is that in a complicated market economy, your part is perhaps just a small part of a bigger picture, and it might sometimes be difficult to sort of see the whole role that you actually play in the economy, because you have this small part. So it might be difficult, at least, to see the meaning of what you're actually doing. And I think that's the point. And still, this way of organizing things could be very efficient. And I guess this is, in some sense, this Marxian theory that you referred to initially, that you actually have this feeling and sort of are removed from the value of your work. So it might be a price we have to pay.
But there's nothing you can really do about that, is there? I mean, if you're talking about a complicated thing, you know, you're not going to build a ship by yourself or build a Model T by yourself. You Some guy puts on the wheels. Some guy does the steering. Some guy is literally just holding a steering wheel for his entire life.
But I think that part of what managers try to do is actually to convince workers that what they do is important, for better or worse. Because there are also activities in the economy, as we discussed, that actually are harmful for society. And then we need to worry that perhaps managers try, nevertheless, to convince workers that it's good. For instance, recently I saw the kind of campaigns that tobacco industry does internally to sort of make their workers feel better about what they're engaged in. I mean, so this can be used for better or for worse. Also for better.
What do they tell them, out of curiosity? What do they say to their employees? Is there any tobacco
to me
employees here, by the way? Is there any more? No?
Yeah, so to me it came across as very cheesy kind of movie. It was mainly so I didn't have the impression that there were really lies in this short clip, but the sound and the pictures that you saw, all in all, because so this was a research presentation, but they showed the clip, and all in I don't like the tobacco industry at all, but I felt slightly more sympathetic towards them after seeing the movie, and so you can see how. Yeah, so movies, but also managers can try and sort of convince and change perceptions, and I think they see this typically as part of their job too.
Okay.
Yeah.
And we also have some experience here in Norway where we have strong unions. We may also experience that during conflicts when we have strikes. Then also people can understand the meaning of their job, because when things disappear, when things stop, you realize that some things
are. If the train
important.
driver is on strike, suddenly people start valuing a train a bit more. But obviously criticizing the train driver.
But actually, conflicts, it's very negative. Yeah. But it can have some positive impact as well.
I would just give one comment on that. That's why we have education and storytelling, because if you can see that little part that you produce as part of a bigger picture, then it may be meaningful that you contribute with that.
Okay. One question there from this lady. I would say take a minute. The last question. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm just listening to you. You have all different angles of this discussion. I'm just thinking. I want to turn it around and say, in your research, you said that when you're doing a research about how many people perceive their job as meaningless, you said like young people kind of overrepresented it.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm thinking if it's a bad thing, actually. Okay, there is many aspects of this answer to that question, but one thing where I'm thinking, it's that like younger generation doesn't identify themselves with their jobs anymore. They have lives outside of work. It's not all the meaning. So when the meaning doesn't have to be solely in work. And work can be a secondary thing, which I think could be a good thing if I talk about that job addiction. I really don't like this term, because going back to the when we look at job markets where we actually work more and more, even the productivity is rising, the salaries are not rising either. Often the situation we have to take 1 or 2 or 3 jobs, it's because our jobs being restructurized, they're being more efficient. We get in one job we can work 2 days, and the other job we can work 3 days, and the other job we have to do freelance.
But
so it's not addiction, it's sometimes a necessity.
Yeah, I understand that. But
I'm just joining.
I just need to interrupt you there.
Yeah, no, that's very useful.
Because
some aspects that I've been missing in this discussion.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
When I said addicted to work or addiction to work, it doesn't necessarily have to do with the actual work, but it's the thinking. It's the values. It's what we see a lot today, I believe, anyways, that you take the kind of structure of your work and you apply that on your leisure time. There's a lot of people that they need to be kind of productive even when they're walking in the mountains.
Yeah, so
they need quality time.
Maybe we just never made a distinction between, are we talking about career, about educated, specialized career people, or are we talking about general? Because I think we have to separate them, because generally I think we want to work less, which is a good thing. We put less importance in our jobs, but we can't.
Yeah, but I don't know how to explain this very precisely, but there's something which is the way that you think about meaning, work, value, etc. And that has become dominant in your whole life. I mean, not yours, but our lives. And that's the problem. It's not the actual work. It's not productivity from the perspective of society. It's not that. The problem is that we are now faced with this strange situation where a lot of people would not really see the point, for instance, of amateur sports. You know, if there's nothing in it, why do it, you know? And there's a lot of these kind of, that's what I mean about rethinking, you know, the fundamental human stuff, because that's where we're headed.
Yeah, so
And final point to Robert, yeah.
So in the data, we are currently actually looking at exactly what you were mentioning. So we're looking at, is it the case that over time people start caring more about making contribution to society as compared to these other things that they may find important in work? How does this differ between generations? And it's work in progress, but sort of, if I can give you a glimpse in the preliminary results, what we find is that there is a stark increase in the weight people attach to making a contribution to society, and it is not so much related to particular cohorts or generations. So it seems it is in the air, and also older workers nowadays seem to care more. Okay, so that's sort of what we find. And in terms of generational effects, it is the case that younger people, they tend to care more, but that was also the case 20 and 30 years ago.
Okay,
Yeah.
well, we'll leave it at that. Looks like there's some hope anyway for the young and
There
the old.
is, definitely.
So, ladies and gentlemen, give a round of applause to our panel, to Robert, to Christian, Helle, Knut, and to Lena. Thank you very much for your time. Enjoy the rest of the festival. Thank you.